This is Oromo Voice Radio English program. Oromo Voice Radio is broadcasting to Oromia at 16-meter band or 17,850 kilohertz or on oromovoice.org website. OVR broadcasts Oromia Insight program every Monday for 15 minutes at 7:15 p.m. Oromia local time. Welcome to Oromia Insight program.
Welcome to Oromia Insight. My name is Ali Galeto. Our guest today is Professor Abbas Gnamo, who teaches third world politics, African government in the politics, and is the politics of development at the University of Toronto. He is best known for his groundbreaking study on the RC Oromo politica and the military resistance against Abyssinian King Menelik II. His new book on the same subject, Conquest in the Resistance of the Ethiopian Empire, 1880 to 1974, the case of the RC Oromo, is the first wide-ranging scholar work on the longest and one of the most bloody chapters in Ethiopian history of conquest and colonization. Welcome, Professor Abbas.
Thank you for inviting me.
Why choose a book titled Conquest in the Resistance in Ethiopian Empire in 1880 to 1974 in first place?
This is very interesting. As you know, conquest and resistance play an important role in world history. By the way, many conquered people tend to divide their history before conquest and after conquest. For example, if you look at the indigenous people, they want to divide their history before their encounter with Europeans. In the same way, the African people tend to divide their history into pre-colonial Africa, colonial Africa, and post-colonial Africa. In the same way, I think we can divide Oromo history into pre-conquest and after conquest. So conquest was really a very important one for many reasons. First of all, for the Oromo people who were always free and independent, it is the time they lost their independence, sovereign existence, and entered into a new phase of their history. Of course, we'll be talking about, of course, what happened to them, how they try to resist, and the consequences. And on the other hand, also for the Ethiopian Empire itself, many books were written about Ethiopian expansion, and they talked from the imperial perspective, how the emperor unified Ethiopia, but they never talked about the reaction and the resistance of Oromo people and other southern people from their perspective. So what I try to do is therefore to look at the conquest from Oromo perspective and the conquest also from imperial perspective. For example, for the Ethiopian Empire, the conquest was really very, very big beneficial effect because the conquest means the Ethiopian territory expanded 3 times. Ethiopian resources and people, resources and land expanded 3 times. It was basically a boom and paradise for the Shoan Kingdom. And of course, this paradise, this economy permitted Ethiopia to solve its economic crisis and eventually to defeat the Italian colonial expansion in Adwa in 1896. And of course, for the Oromo, this of course an important period because it is the beginning of the Gabbar system and their marginalization in the context. So the title is very relevant one because the Oromo talk about the past and the present. The past was where they lived as autonomous people, and then of course how they been ruled under the Ethiopian government over the last century. What? And of course, mostly of course the title was selected to reflect most of the chapters of the book, which covers most of the 20th century. Oromo experience, Ethiopian experience about politics, about economy, about cultural change, which revolves around conquest.
What motivated you to write this book?
It's a very interesting question, and writing this book is not really accidental. It was always somewhere in the corner of my mind. In fact, as you noted, it is an integral part of my scholarly research, which lasted over 3 decades. So I wrote 4 dissertations, original dissertation, different levels of my studies for degrees in anthropology and political science and history. And of course, I published some of my articles and a monograph, but a major book has been expected by many of my friends and, of course, families, because I already wrote a very original paper on Minike's Conquest and RC resistance as part of my BA thesis. By the way, this BA bachelor paper was read by many people in Ethiopia and by students. Until now, until this book, it is the only source available on this long resistance. So I had to really write this book. The second aspect of this is simply I have now long experience and in teaching and, of course, research. I felt it's time to write a comprehensive book which combines the field of anthropology, history, and political science. And, of course, I believe this book is methodologically innovative and fresh in perspective because it simply narrates the history from below. That means non-hegemonic. That means people's history. Until now, as you know, the writers of Ethiopian history were the clergy and then court historians and the people who supported official history, which neglected the other side of the story. But for the first time, this book, of course, takes into consideration the historical experience of the Oromo people from their own perspective. So what I did was to do a long and original research. And at the same time, of course, I read all original secondary material on Ethiopian history. So it is the first balanced book about the Oromo experience and their contact and their struggle, their resistance against the Ethiopian state. So in many ways, therefore, it is simply the opposite of hegemonic official imperial history, of course, which was generally ethnically generated and presented as national identity or national history. This simply reflects a balanced approach, a critical approach to modern Ethiopian history. So, by the way, I naturally try to balance this Ethiopian perspective, Oromo perspective, theoretical perspective, and of course that means we have a better understanding of the Oromo society itself, because somehow I try to integrate in the same book not only about the conquest but also about Oromo civilization, about Oromo, the Gada system, how they build consensus, how the idea of our political culture is based on justice and equality. So most of the things which helped the Oromo to live as society, as people before their conquest, and then, of course, the transformation of this society after their conquest. On the other hand, also, I believe the book can help us to understand the root causes of Oromo grievance narratives, Oromo nationalism, Oromo national movement, as to why the Oromo seek the right to self-determination, and why they have, of course, some complaint against the Ethiopian state, past and present. So by reading this, of course, one can understand the origin of the Oromo question in a very detailed way. So for those who may have access to my book, I really discussed in very detailed manner how this book was conceived and written, including my personal background, academic background, and the how and the why I wrote the book. So there are many examples which were behind my motivation to publish this book and to make it available in English language.
What makes an Ethiopian an empire?
This is really an important question, which is really widely disputed by many people for political reasons, for ideological reasons. For me, it was really intellectual curiosity to really work on this one. Perhaps for those people who may read my book, this is the most detailed, the most difficult chapter to read, because I wanted to really read as many books as possible to compare with Ethiopia and to answer whether or not Ethiopia was an empire, is still an empire. To arrive at this, of course, I made many research and I found some definitions, and based on these definitions and the theoretical model, I simply consider Ethiopia as an empire. The first important one was simply to define Ethiopia as an empire. It comes from the definition. For example, I may quote one definition, which says, empire is a political relationship in which a dominant state exercises political authority over a potentially independent or sovereign polity. And that's, of course, one of the definitions. We have, of course, tens of definition, and this is the one I chose. So one of the interesting sides also, Ethiopian scholars, for political reasons, they want to avoid the term empire. For example, one of the eminent professor, my quote in my book, simply believes that Ethiopia is not an empire. And of course, she went too far by saying even there are no groups we call Amhara, simply means he believes that Ethiopia is always united. There are not many people, no different people, and what we now call Amhara do not even exist. So as you know, this is simply a way of denying the other people, not Amhara identity. So, but in reality, of course, I strongly believe, based on findings I did in my research and theory, Ethiopia fits perfectly the criteria of empire. Why? Number one, empire means a state based on conquest. In my case, as I explained in my book, Ethiopia is based on conquest. Ethiopia was very small, what we call Abyssinia and Central Plateau highlands of northern Ethiopia. So Ethiopia multiplied its territory threefold, which means it is a state based on conquest. The second, an empire is multinational, which is always dominated by one of the groups. In the case of Ethiopia, it is believed there are 80 ethnic groups, but most of them, all of them, practically governed at a time by one group, which means in this case it's very obvious. The Amhara ruled Ethiopia from 1889 until 1991, and now the Tigrayans rule it. So when you ask any Ethiopian other than those who are in power, they simply say Tigrayans are ruling us, Amhara is ruling us, and therefore the Amhara domination is very clear. I established in my book during Haile Selassie's regime, Mengistu's regime, and of course Melik's regime, the extent to which the Amhara dominated the political system, economically and politically. So there is obvious, identifiable, a clear dominant group in Ethiopia. So it is very clear. Although other people may be working for them, they are co-opted. That means they are collaborating for some advantages. You can mention the case of Balabats and now maybe the case of OPDO organization. So it is a government based on naturally domination, which is simply very clear. There's another aspect of empire. Imperial governments are generally based on force and violence. That is, it's obvious, or these governments didn't base their power, have not based their power on consent, but on force. So we know about the Naftanha system, we know about Mengistu, about the current government. Most of these tend to use, of course, violence to rule over their population. So one of the other criteria of empire is simply empires are always characterized with oppression and justice against the people it rules, which leads to revolts and, of course, uprising for self-determination, for autonomy, or for separation. So that's exactly how empires broke up in many places in history. That's why, of course, Eritreans separated from Ethiopia. That's how Tigrayans themselves revolted against Amhara-dominated government. That's why many people still are revolting against them. So in many cases, therefore, the Ethiopian state has all elements in the past, in the present, which shows the imperial nature. So the way it's structured, the way it's ruled, shows the degree of its imperial nature. So even if you ask someone now today, so who rules Ethiopia, it's clear the government is simply known for its origin. So in many ways, therefore, the Ethiopian state is still an imperial state because it's not something which is based on consent, on constitution, of course, on election. So that's why it was an empire.